Hello. A few housekeeping items, or one in particular. I want to apologise for the last video production. You can hear some background noise in it, and there was some workmen next door, which I wasn't aware of at the time because I was focused on delivering the presentation. So please forgive that. And you're probably aware, if you've watched any of these videos, that we believe in unedited, raw footage, a talk delivered live, spontaneously, and my interlocutor, Belinda, spontaneously will just chime in at any point, because we trust in our audience to seek out the truth and to follow what seems true to you. If something has the ring of truth, it might lead you to investigating a subject matter more deeply. And it's also an indication that it is important for us to trust in our inspiration and to go where the Spirit leads, as it were. The second item is to do with the last video as well, where we went pretty deep in looking at the ontological foundations of the new environmental paradigm. By ontological, I mean concerned with being. And we got into a fairly in-depth talk about existence, consciousness, and identity as three axiomatic principles. Now, there still needs to be a fair bit of unpacking of that, because it mightn't be clear with one rendition, but we can do that when we come to talk about education and the liberal arts. We need to first finish up our series on the environment. And it's fitting that we do this today. The date of this recording is the 22nd of May, 2024, and it is the International Day of Cultural Diversity. And yesterday, the 21st of May, is, in the United Nations calendar, which does influence a lot of, the governments around the world and the consciousness of the planet. Yesterday was the International Day of Biological Diversity. And there is a connection between our efforts to protect species and their diversity on the planet and our efforts to protect cultures and their diversity on the planet. So we can talk a bit about that today, but I will just pick up on a point from our ontological discussion of last time, because some of you may be wondering, what has all that talk about existence, consciousness and identity got to do with environmentalism, with the environmental paradigm? Think of it in this way. The waking pre-reflective consciousness that encounters existence, that world of hard edges and separated bodies, is actually encountering its environment. So I want you to make an association between existence as understood in my description and the environment, because existence is what environs the body, my body, with which I am identified. Everything around it is the environment. So, if the existential or pre-reflective vector of our awareness brings us our fundamental concept of environment, then what does the reflective vector of our awareness and consciousness bring us? Remember, existence is revealed by the pre-reflective vector of awareness, consciousness by the reflective vector of awareness when we look into the mirror of others and find our reflection. And identity is represented by our post-reflective vector of awareness. It comes after our grasp of consciousness through reflection. And then we philosophically construct reality and discover the concepts, fundamental concepts of mind and matter. It's this in particular that's going to require some unpacking when we come to talk about education. So, what does the reflective vector and consciousness tell us about our environmental paradigm? Existence gives us our concept of environment philosophically, but consciousness, which reveals our interiority, consciousness is interiority, because as I described last time, everything that I'm aware of is somehow mine. Everything that you're aware of is yours. There's a relativity here. And everything that I'm aware of, looked at through this vector of awareness, is not exterior to myself. It's not outside. It's not environmental. Consciousness discloses an organism. It discloses a field, a unified field of awareness where there is a singular subject and multiple objects, potentially infinite objects. And they go together. Subject and object are not separated. If you properly understand this philosophically, they're not separated in the way that my body is separated from external entities. Another way of saying this is that existence shows us a metaphysical separation, but consciousness shows us an epistemological, to do with knowledge, separation between subject and object, which are not really separated. The subject is actually one with the object. And this is quite organismic because it's a unified whole. Everything is interior. My tree, my table, my sky. So, in terms of constructing our environmental paradigm, the reflective vector of awareness and consciousness reveal the organism. So we have environment and the organism. Environment is the existential view, and the organism is the phenomenal view of one and the same world. Why do I say phenomenal? Well, the word phenomenal comes from the Greek phenomenon, which means an appearance. So the content of consciousness is an appearance to consciousness. Whatever appears enters into the content of consciousness. So it is phenomenal. That's why the school of philosophy that could be tagged phenomenalism would hold that there is nothing other than what appears in the content of consciousness, what enters into the content of consciousness. It would be hard, well nigh impossible, for an adherent of such a school to hold to reality, to affirm reality as something that is independent of consciousness. But that's an aside. So we have the ontological underpinnings of environment and organism. Now, ask yourself, in review of the material that we presented, what is ecology again? Ecology is the study of the organism and organisms in relation to their environment. That's why this is pertinent. Because it's one and the same world, whether I look at it existentially or phenomenally, that tree is one and the same time an external entity and an item within the content of consciousness. At one and the same time, it is an existential entity and an object for consciousness. If we extrapolate to the environmental paradigm, we have to ask whether, and this is more or less a rhetorical question, whether at one level or one and the same time, can an environment be an organism and an organism an environment? And I'm suggesting to you that yes, it can. And not only can it, but we need to hold this view in order to have the correct environmental paradigm. Think of a cell with organelles in it. They're like miniature organs. A human cell or an animal cell. In a human cell, you've got organelles like ribosomes and mitochondria and different components that are like little factories, each performing their role. In a plant cell, you might have chloroplasts containing chlorophyll, which are central to photosynthesis. They are little organelles. And then there's the cell nucleus, which is the brain of the whole cell. And a plant cell might have a cellulose cell wall around it, and an animal cell, a membrane. Now, for an organelle, like a mitochondria, which helps the cell derive energy, it is an organism unto itself. And its environment is what? It's the cell. For a molecule within the mitochondrion, that molecule is an organism unto itself. Because as we said, this whole universe is alive. In a sense, it is the body of God. So that molecule would be the organism, and its environment would be the mitochondrion. One is a microcosm to a macrocosm. That macrocosm, in turn, becomes a microcosm to a larger macrocosm, if I can use those terms. A cosmos, is an ordered system. And this all comes from Greek. A microcosm, a cosmos, is a small organism, and a cosmos is a large organism. The whole cell, say one of the billions of cells in my body, is an organism within a larger environment. What is that larger environment? It is my body, which is an assemblage of cells. At a physical level, I'm a multicellular organism. And this is the pattern all up and down the chain of being. From the smallest quark and electron, right through to the arrangement of galactic superstructures. In fact, the evolutionary biologists tell us that originally organelles like mitochondria were separate little critters. They were organisms unto themselves, like bacteria. And over the course of evolution, they became incorporated into larger bodies. That was their destiny. That was their telos. That was what they were headed for, to be incorporated into a larger body. The proper incorporation of an organism into a larger body means to be in balance with its environment. And this is a fundamental form of homeostasis, because the organism can be a clearinghouse, a transformation point for factors operating in its environment, which in itself is an organism. All the way up and all the way down the chain of being. Now I'm positing a universe that is alive. There are a lot of words thrown around, like panpsychism, hylozoism, and so on. But if, as we say, the Creator has intimately entered into the creation, everything is in God and God is in everything. Every little bit of the universe represents a life in this paradigm. I'm not putting this out as dogma, I'm putting this out as a hypothesis, as a paradigm that will help us understand environmentalism better and make us more effective agents in working with the environment and protecting the environment. As a multicellular organism, I too have an environment. There are other organisms in my environment, just as within the cell, the mitochondria is neighbours with, ribosomes and messenger RNA and other elements, other constituents of the cell.
Quite incredible.
It is incredible. And there's really a great sense of design about it all. And it's amazing how the patterns on the small scale are reproduced on a larger scale. And if this multicellular organism, which we are told is the product of evolution at a biological level, now I'm not saying the human spirit is a product of evolution, but the biology of the body. What's its most meaningful proximal environment? Well, it's all the other human beings that make up a species. And when you get that there is only one human species, there is only one race, the human race, it puts paid to all of these ridiculous racist ideologies that keep getting rewarmed and trotted out to cause divisions between people. Come back to that. One human race, one human species. Could that possibly form an organism? We think of societies as composed of many individual members, millions. We think of different kinds of groupings of human beings. But because of the legacy of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment spawned its own political philosophy, we have a truncated version of what's going on with the social contract, as though a society and a political community is nothing more than individuals giving their consent to a government authority to govern them. And the government is there by the consent of the governed. It all sounds very mechanistic. It's a bit like the Newtonian universe, isn't it? And the deist universe. Very mechanistic. It's deeper and richer than that. There's an organismic side to it as well. That human society is a corporation, is an organism. At least we can think about it in that way. What if it were corporate? What if we're all part of a larger body in whom we live and move and have our being? And what if this larger body does involve the other kingdoms of nature and orders of life? There's part of my body which is called the vegetative nervous system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. And it is strengthened and nurtured by rest and nutrition, and it is going all the time when I'm asleep or when I'm awake, and it keeps my basic processes going. My heart and lungs.
Really quite incredible.
Yeah.
Would that just be by accident?
Well, I don't believe it's by accident, but I also think that
Random.
It's something that I have in common with the vegetable kingdom. And then the other branch of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which makes me take flight or action and so on, is really something that I have in common with the animal kingdom as well. So
Different parts of the brain, isn't it? Like,
yeah, and the nervous system. I mean, they could originate in the brain, but they branch out through the whole nervous system. Mm-hmm. And we know that animals move around, and the sympathetic nervous system can actuate us to move, but the parasympathetic just keeps us going in a steady way, restoring dead tissue, growing, all that,
keeping the heart going.
keeping the heart going, all of that growth, from the
Release
womb
functioning.
onwards, and repair that happens at night when we sleep, all of that, parasympathetic nervous system. And they're just like, well, what I'm getting at here is that the different kingdoms are there, even the mineral kingdom in our bones. So, if this organism is incorporated into what we might think of as a species society, then the other kingdoms are also incorporated into this multi-species society. And at the apex of it is our humanity. And apart from the autonomic system consisting of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, we have this brain, the cerebral cortex, which is the seat of our higher functions and the initiator of our voluntary actions. Choice that acts, because the animals don't have choice, remember? We have to deliberate and choose. We also have higher order conception. That's an interesting subject. Why we need concepts and how we form concepts. We have to understand how we operate, not as machines but as organisms. And we'll never grasp this organismic and environmental paradigm if we think that we can just cut off from humanity and cut off from nature and don't care for the preservation of species, because we know in the natural world, if you remove something from an ecosystem, one organism, then it's going to affect every other organism. And the organisms that, say, feed on this plant, plants harness the sunlight, and then animals feed on the plants, and then other animals feed on the animals, and we feed on both. You remove something, it affects the whole system. And when we only plant monocultures, when we only have one variety of crop, especially when that is a genetically modified crop that's dusted with proprietary herbicide from some big corporation, and you can only grow one particular seed and use one particular herbicide because that seed is genetically modified to be resistant to the herbicide, and this herbicide will kill all the other plants, then we do wipe out species. Like 1 million species are endangered, all the way up the chain. Now, when you wipe out species, the ecosystems lose their resilience. They lose their ability to spring back to health after some shock. In the natural state, you might have hundreds of grains, different types of rice or millet or some grain. And some will be drought resistant and some will be flood resistant. So if there's a drought, some won't flourish, but others will keep going and life survives. And if there's a flood, some will be affected, but others will keep going and life survives, and the system has the ability to regenerate, to restore itself. Now, not only is the diversity principle important in the natural world, it's important also in the cultural world. You hear the activists talk about monocultures of the mind. This is something that we need to be vigilant about, and it's something that we need to avoid getting stuck in a monoculture of the mind, because it makes our humanity less resilient. Think of all of the dissenting voices that are being pushed to the margins with cancel culture. Every voice that goes out like a spark on the horizon makes us weakened as a species. It's like an endangered species. It can easily be extinguished. And our societies don't have a very good track record of bringing the marginalised back into the mainstream, of stopping outcasting from happening, and alienation from happening. And people, quite frankly, from suiciding, which is a grave, grave mistake, but people don't feel that they belong, and this is one of the massive social problems that we have today, especially in our youth. The teen suicide levels going up and up and up and up and up. We've never seen anything like it. And the culture is telling them that that they're only worthwhile if they, well, be in a certain way. So the culture is driving them to extinction, literally to extinction. If we have monocultures of the mind, we also have the pressure of a particular culture taking over the world. There's a danger when that happens. Every empire has an expiry date, of course. But if we're smart, we wouldn't want to push it to the limit, because we'd want to appreciate diversity and try to implement the principle of unity in diversity. You know, we hear people complain about American pop culture taking over the world. Well, yes, it can push out and squeeze out your own local culture. A lot of Australians have complained about that. But it's not just America. It could be any hegemonic culture. It could be Chinese pop culture taking over the world. What's the current empire? The British Empire was the big empire before. Its culture took over the world. The Roman Empire did at one point. If we have a Chinese empire or a Russian empire or something else, there's still the danger of the hegemonic dominant culture taking over the world and leading to a loss of cultural diversity. So we need to be vigilant. Are languages being suppressed? Local languages, indigenous languages? Is indigenous knowledge being suppressed? Are customs and religious values being suppressed? Is there room within our paradigm to accommodate what is true and good in all the peoples of the earth? Because you won't solve the environmental problem by splitting it off from the socio-cultural problem. They have to be solved together. And the solution will involve a preservation of biological diversity, as well as a preservation of cultural diversity.